Hello fellow online classmates, my name is Curtis McClelland and I produce under the name of BlitzDub. Today for my assignment I will be talking about visualizing sound using multiple different plugins. So here we go. I use Logic Pro, so I created a quick demo reel here with two different waveforms to show that they're different when visualized within sound. First one is a sine wave, second a square. Both of these tracks have the same effects on them, which are actually visualizing units. First is Smexoscope from Smart Electronics. It's a really good free oscilloscope if you're looking for one of those. Second is the channel EQ, standard within Logic. It's a pretty good frequency analyzer. Not the best, but it gets the job done. Lastly, I have Sonic Visualizer, which I picked up from the first Coursera online course I took, which will be acting as my sonogram for today. Now, before we go any further, the sonogram isn't going to be entirely accurate for, more specifically, the sine wave that you're looking at right now, because I use Massive just to load up a simple waveform in each, so it may be colored by that, but the general principles remain the same. So let's start with the sine wave. When we load up the oscilloscope, on the y-axis, we are going to have amplitude, or volume. On the x-axis, we are going to have time. So if I were to play this here at a lower time, for example, I'm also using my speakers because Soundflower refused to work for me. So, quick disclaimer for that. It should look a little something like this. So if I freeze that quick. Now, as you can actually see here, there is a perfect sine wave here. And we can see that the sine wave goes through a valley section here, peak section here, and of course there's a little bit of variation because I am using third-party VST. So it's not a perfect sine wave, but within here, you can see what the oscilloscope is doing. So you see on the y-axis, it shows the amplitude of the sine wave, and on the y-axis is the actual waveform through time. So let's keep that there for a second. So we've seen what the oscilloscope can do in visualizing sound, specifically this sine wave right here. Let's see what happens in our spectrum analyzer. On the y-axis, we remain to have amplitude, but on the x-axis, it's a lot more different than the oscilloscope up here. The x-axis measures the frequency of the sound that we're running through. So if I run the same two plugins at the same time, we will see this. Now you see the oscilloscope continue to show the waveform moving over the constant time, but when you look at the spectrum analyzer, we have a peak showing around in between 100 and 200 hertz. I'm playing a note at C2, so I don't know the exact frequency, but if you look at the peak, I'd say that's more 130, 135. But since the sine wave is a fundamental frequency, we can see that that peak is up there at around 135. So we've seen what can happen on the oscilloscope and the spectrum analyzer. But what sort of happens when we go into a spectrogram or a sonogram or whatever term you want to use? As you can see, there are more higher frequency partials. I do apologize. I'm using Massive as a third-party VST, which colors the sound, as I showed in the oscilloscope demonstration. But we can still see that, at its core, it still remains to be primarily a fundamental frequency. We can see that there's not a whole lot of high-frequency partials. A little bit because of the coloration within the synth, but there's not a whole lot. And of course, you've also noticed that on the x-axis is time as we play the sound, and on the y-axis is frequency. This is one of the really good, accurate ways to actually visualize sound, because we're seeing the full timbral effect of the sound while it is playing through time. So it gives a really accurate look at what sound actually looks like when it's being a sound. Let's quickly go over to our square wave channel here, which I can condense down to that now. Let's open up the oscilloscope for the square wave. And let's see what we find here. Let's quickly zoom out a bit. So we'll stop there. Now what we're seeing in the oscilloscope here, as opposed to the sine wave before, is that a square wave has amplitude levels here, down, and here. So it stays really level. Square waves are also referred to as pulse waves because of this shape. and that it sort of pulses back and forth between the top level amplitude and the low level amplitude when it does oscillate. Let's open up our channel EQ. Let's see what we find with a square wave. Forgot to turn analyze on. What we see right there within the channel EQ is, as we play the sound, there's a fundamental frequency at the same rate as the sine wave, around 135 hertz. But we have many high frequency partials coming after this. As we all know, a square wave has high frequency partials, every other high frequency ratio partial, with an amplitude relationship of 1 over n, where n represents the number of partial that it's on. But we look at this and we can see that clearly. There's the first one, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, on and on and on, pretty much. Now what happens when we go into the sonogram to see the timbral effect of this? Let's quickly slide over and whoa! Holy timbre! Quickly just bring this down. This is a great plugin because it works as any sort of visualizer. It works as an oscilloscope up here, and it works as a sonogram, and really great plugin. So let's quickly just zoom all the way out. We see the sine wave here to directly compare. There's not a lot of timbral data going on here. We go over to the square wave. We have a lot more high frequency partials within this, and that sounds a lot like this. The bounce came out a little bit of a higher pitch. I apologize for that, but you still see the idea. So let's not restart that right away. So what we see with this sonogram is that our orange color here is our fundamental frequency. It starts to break into yellows, goes down to greens, and eventually up to this sort of turquoise blue that's barely audible. Very barely audible. Now, of course, this is about, just for curiosity's sake, that's around the level of 20,887 hertz, so it's far out of the human hearing range. But the program can still demonstrate this well. It shows that the square wave has far more timbral content than the sine wave. Anyways, I hope you guys maybe learned something from the video. Maybe it helped to have things explained more layman's terms, or maybe it helps seeing different plugins, a different DAW, a different way of showing it. I really do recommend Sonic Visualizer. I always just like to run sound through that just to see it through all different sort of visualizations. It really helps me understand sound a bit more, and I hope that firming up your knowledge on visualizing sound does too. Thank you.